What's up, you guys? Welcome to Coffee Conversations, episode one, video one, whatever. It doesn't matter, honestly. Anyways, I'm super excited for this. I'm going to challenge myself to upload Coffee Conversations Monday through Friday for an entire week. So, for this whole week. And what I'm going to give you is pretty much all my notes that I have taken and that I will be taking every single morning from my Bible reading time. So what I'm hoping is that God will give us a word every single morning that we'll be discussing in Coffee Conversations. Let's get to the word. I think we have a good word today. We're going to be in Job. Right now, I'm kind of reading the NLT version and the King James version, and there's just so much good stuff in Job that will go through the first couple chapters. I'm not going to read all of the chapters. You guys can totally read that like on your own time. Maybe we could share notes. Maybe you could hop onto the comments and let me hear your notes. Let me read your notes. I am going to put my glasses on though, because my eyes are just like not as good as they used to be. There's not a lot of prescription on this at all, but I feel like they'll just help give some pressure off of my eyes right now, like while we're reading and all of this stuff. Get comfortable. It's about to get good. Okay, so we'll start Job. Let's just start from the beginning, Job chapter 1, in case you've never read Job. So Job is someone that God considered blameless. God considered him a man of complete integrity. Also, he feared God and stayed away from evil. He was a very blessed man. In fact, the Bible tells us that he was the richest man in his area. So he had lots of animals. He had workers. He had 7 daughters, and I'm sorry, he had 3 daughters and 7 sons. So he had a pretty good amount of children, right? But then Satan, being Satan approaches God and he's like, well, yeah, of course he's, good. And, of course he's, stays away from evil and he's a man of integrity. And of course he fears you because you have had this hedge of protection around him. And he has a good life. Like, how could he not? Who wouldn't, right? Who wouldn't fear you and, really be this blameless person if they weren't so blessed, right? And so, God allows Satan to test Job. When I read this, I was like, what? God, why? Seriously, like I don't know if I've read Job before, to be completely honest. I am doing a Bible reading plan that I started earlier in the year, which is going really, really well. I'm literally crossing off every book that I read in the Bible, so that way I can at least read every single book at least once. But I do kind of repeat books just because they're so good and I like them that much. But anyway, so in Job, I don't think I've ever done like a deep dive in Job before, at least not that I can recall, and my memory is giving out on me, so I'm not so sure. But anyway, so in Job, we read that Satan approaches God and he's like, well, yeah, he fears you and he stays away from evil, but, Job has good reason to fear you and, let me test him. And God agrees to allow Job to be tested. And so the devil does test him. Job ends up losing his animals. His children all die, like all on the same day. All this tragedy strikes Job. He still has his wife, but he loses everything else. And it says, suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed and all your children are dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. So it just goes on to tell this story, how someone is the only one who has escaped to tell Job about his sheep and all of his shepherds and how they were in a fire and then all his children died and just all this devastation, right? And so Job, on chapter 1, verse 20, he stands up, he tears his robe in grief, he shaves his head, he falls to the ground to worship God, and he says, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. And the Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. And all this, Job did not sin by blaming God. He is, however, just in this grief, right? He shaves his head, tears off his robe, and he's just in this grief. And when I read that he shaved his head, it reminded me of Britney Spears. Remember when Britney Spears shaved her head? Later, like during that moment, everyone was kind of like, she's crazy, she's gone crazy. But after the fact, a lot has come out that um there was a lot happening to her, whatever. Like, it's all debatable, right? That she was kind of fighting a lot of control or whatever it was. Like, I don't know. But I'm just saying, like, shaving your head, like, seems to be a sign of grief or distress or whatever it is, right? But anyway, he shaves his head. Then the second test comes, which is when Satan's like, well, let me test him again. You know, what if I can take away his health or whatever, right? And so God tells Satan, okay, but spare his life. Like, you can't kill him. And so he ends up getting all of these terrible boils from head to foot. So just imagine now, like, we really need to comprehend where Job is at before we move on, okay? Because I just feel like we can be so quick to judge. Like, we can be so quick to judge our brothers and our sisters that are in the church, that are suffering, and we're not empathetic enough. Like, we look at the situation and maybe we're like, oh my gosh, that sucks. Like, I would hate to be them, but we're not really trying to put ourselves in those situations or those positions to really be the best support and help that we can be for them. And so we find that Job has lost almost everything, right? He's lost all his animals, he's lost his children, and now he's losing his health, okay? And so three of his friends, I feel like there's like a special number with like three friends. Like, I don't know. I have a group of friends. If you guys are watching this, no, I'm kidding. And so I don't know. There's just something about having three friends around. So, anyways, Job has three friends that share in his anguish. They travel from the comfort of their homes. So they leave the comfort of where they're at because they end up seeing that Job has gone through all this tragedy and suffered all this tragedy. So they come to comfort and console him, right? And they see Job, and it says that he's unrecognizable, that he's so unrecognizable, but he's wailing loudly. And so they tore off their own robes and they throw dust over their heads to show their grief. And they all sat on the ground, it says, for 7 days and nights. And the Bible says, and I quote here, and this is chapter 2, verse 13. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. So I think that takes a lot of wisdom. I think it takes a lot of wisdom to come and support your friends that are suffering. And to just sit with him, like to just sit with him and to understand that in this moment, there are no words that can comfort him because his suffering is so great, right? It's so tragic that there really are no words at that moment. And I find that to be true. I find that to be true as someone that has, a lot of you know my testimony through my videos or through speaking at church or whatever it is, where my daughter was diagnosed with lupus, and gradually it became critical and it became worse. And I know that a lot of my friends, reach out to support and to comfort and all of that. And I can tell you that sometimes there really just are no words. Like, sometimes there's nothing that you can tell me that will comfort me. Like, I have to get through it. I have to get through it on my own. I feel like fact of the matter is that no one can really help you through suffering but God. But God. I know that as a friend and wanting to be a good friend, that can feel helpless and like, no, like I can't accept that. But truly, as someone that has gone through suffering, that has gone through loss. When I was 2 years old, my dad died in a car accident. as someone that has grown up with loss, and then has continued to like endure hardships in my life. Sometimes there's just no words. And I think as friends, trying to support people that are suffering, we have to understand that truly the one that is going to help the person through suffering is God, And so, anyways, let's go on to read in chapter 3, Job's first speech. So finally, like, no one has uttered a word. The friends didn't speak the first word. Let's like take note of that. Job's friends weren't the first ones to speak. The first one to speak was Job. And I think that's so important that, when we are trying to help and support our friends, that, we allow them to utter their words first and really be listeners. I think a lot of times when we are in conversation of people, we're not actively listening. We're thinking about how we're going to respond, right? Like, how many of us do that? How many of us are in conversation with someone and we're not actively listening? We're like, okay, what am I going to say? Like, what can I say? We're trying to think of a response. And really, I think what we need to do is be active listeners when we are in conversation with anyone. I want to say, like, and it just came to my head, especially with our children. I think with our children, first and foremost, we need to be active listeners, because right now they're coming to you with things that are important to them that really don't look important to us. Like, maybe they're coming to you with like whatever it is, like how they lost in the game or something on their iPads or whatever, right? Or how they can't find their stuffy, a specific stuffy or whatever it is. Listen, this is like what's important to them right now. If we are not listening to what's important to them right now when they're young children, they're not going to come to us when they're teenagers and when they're older and share what's important at those moments, because they're going to know that we don't listen to them right now as children, that we don't take heart what they take heart, right? Like, what they find important is not important to us. So I think it's important we are active listeners in all conversations. Our husbands as well, I just gotta say it. So anyways, let's go back to Job. So in Job chapter 3, Job is the first one to speak out after his suffering, and his three friends are there trying to just kind of be supportive, right? Be there as support. And so Job, when he speaks, he curses the day of his birth. We go on in chapter 3 to go on through this kind of poetic scripture on how he is just talking over and over and describing in different ways how he just wishes he wasn't born, because the grief and the hardship that he is going through to him feels unbearable. He feels like, I can't go through this. This is too much for me to endure. I wish I wasn't born. Why wasn't I born dead? Why did that day have to exist? He talks about the calendar, how he just wishes that day wasn't even on the calendar. And so we can see that he is in this deep grief, okay? He's in this deep grief, and I just highlighted some of the points, some of the scripture, where he's like, curse the day for failing to shut my mother's womb, for letting me be born to see all this trouble. Had I died at birth, I would now be at peace. I would be asleep and at rest. For in death, the wicked cause no trouble. And he's just going on and on. I have no rest. Only trouble comes. And he's going on about how he just really wishes he wasn't born, because he feels that his grief is just too much for him to endure. And then one of his friends responds, and I find this really, I actually found this kind of funny. Then his friends respond. One of his friends responds, and he starts off with, in chapter 4, verse 2, he says, "Will you be patient and let me say a word? For who could keep from speaking out?" Like, hey, who can relate to that? Like, who can be like, listen, if my friend is in grief and rambling on about all her hardship and how hard it is, and they're crying and they're suffering and they're complaining. And so this friend's like, how can I not speak out? Like, how can I not say a word? And it says, will you be patient? Let me say a word. For who could keep from speaking out? Like, he's just like, how can I not talk to you? And I think it's important to not only look at how his friend responds after hearing him just curse the day he was born and all this stuff, but then also listening to the response of Job after his friend responds. And so let's get into that. So Job's friend is saying, in the past, you have encouraged many people. You have strengthened those who were weak. Your words have supported those who were falling. You encouraged those with shaky needs. But now, when trouble strikes, you lose heart. You are terrified when it touches you. Doesn't your reverence for God give you confidence? Doesn't your life of integrity give you hope? And so it seems like we find that Job was, he was a good man, like an encouraging man. He would speak words of encouragement. He would encourage and support those around him who were losing heart. And so his friends like, look it, this is what you would do. How are you not now? How are you now not encouraged? So, Job's friend is just going on and on about, he's going on, if I were you, he does say this, and I do find this to be very important. He says, if I were you, I would go to God and present my case to him. He does great things too marvelous to understand, and he performs countless miracles. And so that is chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. We're just moving along, Job, you guys. It's good though, right? And so then his friend continues to say, he strikes, but his hands also heal. You will be safe from slander. You know that your home is safe. When you survey your possessions, nothing will be missing. You will have many children. And then he says in 27, we have studied life and found this all to be true. Listen to my counsel and apply it to yourself. And then Job speaks. So let's pay attention to Job's response. So his friends, his friends doing what he believes is right. Like, he's listening to him. He listened to him kind of complain and all of that, kind of go off in his grief. And now his friends trying to encourage and comfort him, right? And so then Job says, and I found this to be quite funny. He says, and this is chapter 6. Job says, if my misery could be weighed and my troubles be put on scales, they would outweigh all the sands of the sea. That is why I spoke impulsively. So he's literally saying right there, listen, I'm speaking impulsively, and probably just speaking what he's thinking. He's not thinking about what he's saying. He's just speaking. He spoke impulsively. He didn't think about it. He didn't pre-plan it. He didn't prepare it. He didn't script it. He just spoke, right? What was on his mind, because his misery is that great. It's that heavy. His misery is that heavy that he just spoke out, right? In verse 8, he says, oh, that I might have my request, that God will grant my desire. I wish he would crush me. I wish he would reach out his hand and kill me. And so he's still kind of talking in this grief, right? But then he says, at least I can take comfort in this despite the pain. And he says, I have not denied the words of the Holy One, but I don't have the strength to endure. I have nothing to live for. Do I have the strength of a stone? Is my body made of bronze? No, I am utterly helpless without any chance of success. So he's like, I'm in all this grief. Let me talk out. I'm not cursing God. I'm only, speaking out on the grief that I am going through that feels unbearable, right? And then he goes on to say, one should be kind to a fainting friend, but you accuse me without any fear of the Almighty. My brothers, you have proved as unreliable as a seasonal brook that overflows its banks in the spring. So he's telling his friends that are trying to encourage him, you've proved to be unreliable. Your words are not helping me. You are not helping me in this grief. You're not helping me. It seems like Job feels like they're not understanding him because they're trying to give him advice to, like, hey, you would encourage others, why don't you go to God and, and allow him to help you. He's like, you shouldn't be judging me right now in this moment of great grief, right? And so he goes on to say in verse 21, you too have given no help. He says, you have seen my calamity and you are afraid, but why? Have I ever asked you for a gift? Have I begged for anything of yours for myself? Have I asked you to rescue? Have I asked you to rescue me from my enemies or to save me from ruthless people? And then I'm going on to verse 26 just for time. It says, do you think your words are convincing when you disregard my cry of desperation? He's like, why are you afraid that I am speaking? I translate that as, why are you scared and afraid and concerned that I'm speaking my honest grief and thoughts? Why are you afraid of that? I'm not asking you for anything. And he goes on to say, do you think your words are convincing when you disregard my cry of desperation? It's like, like, you think I'm going to be convinced by your words? Like, can you not hear the grief and the pain that I am going through? And so it says, look at me, would I lie to your face? Stop assuming my guilt, for I have done no wrong. Do you think I am lying? Don't I know the difference between right and wrong? And so he just goes on to say, like, I haven't done anything wrong. Like, don't you think I know the difference? And so I just think that's so interesting. And I feel like maybe we should stop right there. And then we'll go on we can start off at chapter 7 tomorrow. But I think it's really important to really look at this conversation between Job and his friend, and to kind of, like, see, like, what can we take from this conversation? Job was suffering a lot. His friends are there trying to help and support him. And Job is kind of taking it, probably not in the best way, right? Because he's in this grief and he's saying, like, what am I doing wrong by telling you about my grief? What am I doing wrong about expressing my emotions and my grief? And why do you feel a need or desire to try to convince me otherwise? And I think it's important to note that. And I can tell you that, with my own experience, when I am going through heartache or I'm having a very difficult day, because it gets hard when you are dealing with critical chronic illness and you have the ups and downs from it. And sometimes you just need to express yourself, express your emotions, and you don't always need to be, like, encouraged. I said that in another video. It doesn't mean don't encourage your friends. Definitely encourage your friends, but I think be quicker to listen than to speak. When it comes to supporting friends that are going through suffering, that have been through something for a really long time, it's really important that we listen before we're so quick to speak. Because a lot of times we just need someone to listen. Like, we just want people to, like, understand. We don't need tips or tricks, or we don't always need advice. I will say, though, that for me personally, something that has really helped me in going through this is hearing people's testimonies. Like, I think 100% share your testimony with people that have gone through something similar. I have had quite a few people share their testimonies with me, and I appreciate that so incredibly much, more than I can explain or describe. Especially if it's like something similar. I can think of the names of the people that have shared their testimonies with me in conversation in person, and also through text. Like, I fully am open to receiving text messages from people that have gone through similar things, and they send me their testimonies and even send pictures. I've had people send me pictures, and I love that. Like, I appreciate that. That is very encouraging to me. I even share those stories with my husband to encourage him as well, as we go through our own difficulties with dealing with what we're dealing with, right? And so I think there's just so much to gain and to learn so far from Job in his suffering. And so tomorrow we'll continue on with chapter 7 and go from there. I hope that you have enjoyed this coffee conversation. And we'll just end here, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Mwah. Bye.